He did what with my property? That was the only thought racing through my head as I stood frozen on my back deck, staring at the chaos unfolding just beyond my fence. There, on the edge of my lakefront, land I legally owned and had paid a premium for, stood an entire family having what looked like a full-blown cookout. Lawn chairs were spread out like it was some kind of summer resort. A portable grill was smoking with burgers and hot dogs. Kids were running in and out of the water, and 2 paddleboards floated lazily on the lake. I even saw a speaker system blasting pop music while one of the guys cracked open a cooler filled with drinks. I couldn't process it. At first, I thought maybe they were lost or confused, maybe they wandered too far from the community picnic area. But then I saw the folding table covered with snacks, sunscreen bottles, and someone's handbag. These people weren't passing by. They were settled in. Like they belonged there. Like it was theirs. I stormed across my yard, walked right up to them, and asked the first adult I saw, "Hey, sorry, who told you you could be here? This is private property." A woman in her 40s, sunglasses on and drink in hand, looked at me like I had just asked her if water was wet. "Carl said it was okay," she said, chewing her gum slowly. "He said it's for everyone now. Neighborhood perk or something." "Carl who?" I asked, though deep down, I already knew. "Carl Moore," she replied, like I should have been thanking her. "You know, the HOA president? He said you weren't using it and it just made sense to let the family enjoy it for the weekend." For a second, I stood there in disbelief. She was talking about my lakefront. My dock. A dock I had paid to have inspected and cleaned when I moved in 3 months ago. The shoreline had been listed as a key selling point in the real estate ad. Private lakefront access, 100% deeded, no shared rights, it said. I even remembered the real estate agent patting the deck's railing during the walkthrough and saying, people would kill for this lake view. And now? Carl had apparently just given it away like some raffle prize. I clenched my jaw and turned back toward the house, trying not to lose it on this poor woman who clearly didn't realize she was trespassing. I wasn't going to cause a scene in front of the kids, yet. But Carl? Oh, Carl was about to hear it. I marched straight inside, grabbed the thick folder with all my property paperwork, and started flipping through it. Survey map, check. Plat boundary, check. Deed description, very clear. The lakefront, from the edge of the backyard down to the waterline, was part of my parcel. There was no easement. No shared access. No mention of common HOA ownership. I even found an email from the county confirming there were no public access points near my property. I printed everything, stapled it together, and drove down to Carl's house. He was outside, trimming a hedge like he didn't just commit grand theft shoreline. When he saw me, he gave a wave like we were old fishing buddies. "Hey there. Beautiful day out, huh?" I didn't return the pleasantry. "Carl, we need to talk. Right now." He raised an eyebrow and wiped his hands on his gardening apron. "Sure, what's the issue? You gave my lakefront to your family." That wiped the smile off his face, for a second. But then he waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, that? Come on, don't be like that. It's just for the weekend. They're good people, and the lake is for everyone, right?" "No," I snapped. "It's not. I paid for that property. It's in the deed. It's in the survey. It's mine. You don't have the right to offer it to anyone." Carl tilted his head. "Well, that's not the way I see it. You're part of a community now. And we've always treated the lake as a shared feature. Just because it's on your property line doesn't mean it can't be enjoyed by others." "You don't get to decide that," I said, holding up the papers. "This is private land. You're not the king of the HOA. You can't gift what you don't own." Carl shrugged, completely unbothered. "Well, Maybe it's time the board reviewed how that lakefront is managed. You don't use it much anyway. That was it. That was the moment the fuse inside me lit. The arrogance. The entitlement. The complete disregard for what was legal and fair, all because he didn't think I was using it enough. Who was he to decide how often I should sit by the water or take my kayak out? I worked hard to afford that lake view. I had been saving for years to buy a place that felt like peace, and now my peaceful lakefront had become Carl's family barbecue zone. I walked away before I said something I couldn't take back. But inside, I was boiling. This wasn't just some misunderstanding. Carl knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted to look like the generous HOA president, the one who gave his relatives access to the prettiest corner of the lake. And to do it, he used my land like it was his to hand out. He thought he could get away with it. He thought I wouldn't fight back. He had no idea what was coming next. The next morning, I woke up with one mission in mind, to shut this down for good. I wasn't going to let Carl's delusion continue. My property wasn't some community prize he could hand out to score points with his family. After making myself a strong cup of coffee, I sat down at my kitchen table and started calling real estate attorneys. I wanted to know exactly what my legal options were and how fast I could act. The third attorney I called, a woman named Jillian, listened patiently while I explained everything: the lakefront parties, the unauthorized use, the HOA president's involvement, and the clear deed showing my ownership. She didn't hesitate. "You have every right to protect your property," she said firmly. "If your deed includes that lakefront, no HOA president or community member can override that." What Carl did, offering access to others, could even be seen as a violation of property law. And if you let it continue, they might argue implied access or prescriptive easement down the line. I suggest putting up a fence or some kind of boundary immediately. I thanked her, hung up, and took a deep breath. A fence. It felt like a drastic step, but maybe it was the only one left. I hadn't wanted to go that far, but Carl had left me no choice. This wasn't about being unfriendly. This was about protecting what I owned, and making sure no one else could just waltz in and take it. Before heading out, I printed extra copies of the deed and survey maps, just in case someone tried to challenge me again. Then I drove straight to the nearest fencing company and scheduled a site visit for that same afternoon. I chose a sleek cedar design with black iron posts, strong enough to be permanent, tasteful enough not to look like a prison wall. It would follow the property line precisely, hugging the curve of the lake, and include a locked gate for personal access. The salesman tried to upsell me on custom panels, and for once, I said yes. If I was doing this, I was doing it right. Later that evening, as I stood by the lake marking the line with little red flags, Carl walked up behind me like he had just come to borrow a cup of sugar. "Hey, what's all this?" he asked, pretending he didn't already know. "I'm building a fence," I said bluntly. "It'll go up this week. Full enclosure. No more public access. No more confusion." Carl scoffed, crossing his arms. "That's a little aggressive, don't you think? We're neighbors. You don't need to wall yourself off." "I wouldn't have had to if you hadn't given away my lakefront like it was a public park," I shot back. "This is on you." He narrowed his eyes. "You're going to make enemies doing stuff like this." "I'd rather have enemies than freeloaders," I said. He muttered something under his breath and walked off, but I could feel the storm brewing. I wasn't afraid. I was ready for it. By Thursday, the fence was up. 10-foot cedar panels, perfectly aligned, with metal reinforcements at every joint. The contractor even added motion lights near the gate for security. I posted 2 signs: private property, no trespassing, and surveillance in use. Then I stood back and looked at it. For the first time in weeks, I felt peace. No more parties. No more strangers dragging coolers across my lawn. Just my property, protected and clear. But the silence didn't last long. Friday evening, Carl called an emergency HOA board meeting. I got the notice in my email with a subject line that read, Fence Discussion and Community Impact. That night, I logged into the Zoom call, half expecting to see a few concerned neighbors. Instead, nearly the whole neighborhood had shown up, 23 households, cameras on, staring at the screen. Carl opened with flair, as usual. We're here tonight to discuss a matter that affects us all. The sudden fencing of what was previously enjoyed as part of our shared lakefront culture. Some of you have already expressed concern. This fence divides us, literally and figuratively. He gestured like he was in a courtroom. One neighbor has chosen to wall off a section of the lake that many families have enjoyed for years. This isn't the kind of community we built here. I unmuted myself. With all due respect, Carl, that section of lake was never public. It's in my deed. I bought this property because of the private access. You didn't ask. You didn't clarify. You just decided to give it away. Carl smirked. We've always treated the lakefront as a shared feature. That's what makes this neighborhood special. I held up the deed to the camera. What makes it special is respecting ownership. This document, signed, filed, and legally binding, shows that lakefront belongs to me. You don't get to change that because it fits your version of the community. A few other residents unmuted their mics. One neighbor, Sheila, said, Actually Carl, I had no idea that section was private either. If it's in the deed, we shouldn't have been using it. That's on us. Another man added, Honestly, I wouldn't be okay if someone used my property without asking. Fence or no fence, it's his right. That's when Carl started losing it. His face turned red, and he went into a rant about how I was turning the neighborhood cold, how this was not the kind of environment we wanted. But it was too late. People had seen the documents. They realized he had overstepped, and badly. The tide was turning, and Carl was sinking fast. By the end of the call, a motion was made, and seconded, to review Carl's actions and leadership. It wasn't an official vote to remove him, not yet, but the tone was clear. People were starting to question everything. After the meeting, I got a dozen messages from neighbors. Some apologizing for using the lake without asking, others thanking me for standing up. And Carl? He didn't say a word. Not that night. Not the next day. Not even when I passed him in the street. But the best part? My lakefront stayed quiet. No chairs. No coolers. No strangers. Just the sound of water lapping the rocks and birds flying low across the surface. For the first time, it actually felt like mine. The next morning, I stepped out onto my deck with a cup of coffee in hand and a calm sense of satisfaction washing over me. The tall cedar fence stood like a quiet sentinel at the edge of my yard, separating my land from the chaos Carl had tried to unleash. The lake was peaceful again. No strangers. No litter. No unsolicited barbecues. For once, I could actually enjoy what I had paid for without worrying about some random guest showing up uninvited. But of course, that calm didn't last long. Around 9 a.m., I noticed a group of people gathering near the edge of the HOA-maintained common area that bordered part of my fence. I recognized a few of them, mostly Carl's close friends and a couple of board members who always seemed to vote however Carl wanted. They stood there whispering and pointing at the fence, like it was some kind of hostile act. I watched from the deck as Carl strutted toward the group holding a clipboard, sunglasses perched arrogantly on his face like he was preparing for battle. Minutes later, I got the email, Notice of Non-Compliance, HOA Board Ruling Required. I opened it, and sure enough, Carl had filed an official complaint stating that my fence violated the harmony and uniformity of the neighborhood and had not been submitted through proper architectural review. I laughed out loud. He was really trying to use a technicality to tear it down. But I wasn't worried. Before building anything, I had checked the HOA's covenants thoroughly. There was no clause that restricted fencing around personal property, and more importantly, I wasn't modifying any HOA-maintained land. Every inch of that fence was within my deeded boundaries. I didn't need permission to build something on what I legally owned. Still, I decided to be proactive. I emailed the board directly with attachments of the property survey, the building permits, contractor info, and a detailed explanation of why the fence was built. I also copied the lawyer I'd spoken with, just to make sure things stayed professional. A few days later, the board called another meeting, this time in person at the community clubhouse. I debated not going, but then I figured, no, I should go. Let them hear it straight from me. When I walked in, Carl was already seated at the front with his little stack of papers, acting like some smug judge. The room was full again, but this time the mood felt different. People weren't just chatting about community harmony anymore. They were whispering about property lines, legal overreach, and how Carl had made a mess. He opened the meeting with a long-winded speech about how the character of the neighborhood was changing, and how unilateral actions like the lakefront fence could set a dangerous precedent. I waited until he finished, then calmly stood up and walked to the center of the room. I understand the concern, I began. No one wants a neighborhood filled with ugly fences or personal disputes. But this isn't about character, this is about ownership. That lakefront is mine. Not public. Not HOA maintained. Not community property. It is part of my deeded land. And after Carl repeatedly allowed others to trespass, I had no choice but to secure it. I held up the papers again. Here's the plat map. Here's the property line. Here's the county record. I followed the law. I followed local permitting rules. The fence is on my land, and I didn't need HOA approval to build it because it does not affect shared spaces. There was a pause. A long one. Then someone from the back of the room stood up. It was Mr. Kellerman, one of the older residents. I've lived here 17 years, he said. We've had disagreements before, but I've never seen anything like this. If this man owns the lakefront, then it's his. End of story. That opened the floodgates. One by one, neighbors began speaking, some surprised to learn the lakefront wasn't public, others frustrated that Carl had overstepped. A few even said they'd never supported the way Carl ran things, but didn't speak up until now. It became obvious that the board had no grounds to demand the removal of the fence. And just like that, Carl's plan to use HOA rules as a weapon fell apart. But the damage to Carl's reputation was already done. People started murmuring about leadership changes, and whether someone who misused power so openly should even remain HOA president. The moment the meeting adjourned, I noticed several people gathering around one of the board members, not Carl, discussing how to propose a formal vote to remove him. I didn't get involved. I had no desire to lead any crusade. I just wanted my peace back. Over the next week, things got quiet again, almost too quiet. Carl didn't say a word to me. No emails, no warnings, no angry letters on my porch. But I could feel his resentment from a mile away. He had lost his authority, his control, and worst of all, his illusion. The neighborhood now understood he wasn't some benevolent leader, but a man who had willingly crossed the line, both figuratively and literally. Then one evening, I heard a knock on my door. It was Carl's cousin, the same woman who had been grilling hot dogs on my lakefront weeks earlier. She looked sheepish. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, she said quietly. I didn't know that part of the lake was yours. Carl told us it was all open. If I had known, I wouldn't have let the kids run around like that. I appreciated the honesty. I told her no hard feelings, but asked her to please respect the boundary going forward. She nodded and walked off, and I closed the door feeling strangely relieved. Not because I needed her apology, but because it confirmed what I suspected all along. Carl had lied to them, too. He hadn't just used my property, he had used his own family as pawns in his petty game of power. From then on, the fence stood untouched. People kept their distance. And oddly enough, some neighbors even started putting up small fences of their own, not to isolate themselves, but to draw clear lines. To make things respectful and understood. It became a quiet trend, a symbolic shift in how the community viewed ownership and personal boundaries. I never wanted a fight. I never wanted drama. But sometimes, standing your ground means making things uncomfortable. It means saying no, even when someone tells you to just go along. Because when you allow one person to trample your boundaries, others will follow. And before you know it, what's yours isn't yours anymore. That fence didn't just reclaim my property, it reclaimed my peace. 2 weeks after the fence went up, I was finally starting to feel the calm settle in for good. No new complaints. No HOA drama showing up in my inbox. Just me, the lake, and the quiet. The water looked clearer somehow, as if it too had been holding its breath, waiting for all the noise to die down. I'd built the fence to protect my property, sure, but what I hadn't expected was how deeply it would restore my peace of mind. Every morning, I'd come out with my coffee, sit on the small bench I'd placed by the inside of the fence, and just take it all in. This was what I bought the home for. This view. This silence. This sense of ownership, not just on paper, but in reality. But of course, nothing in a neighborhood like mine stays quiet for long. Not when people like Carl still think they run the show. The real storm came a month later. The HOA board officially added a vote to the monthly meeting agenda, a no-confidence motion against Carl. Word had spread about everything. How he authorized access to private land, how he weaponized HOA rules when he got embarrassed, and how he tried to manipulate the community into turning against me. It turned out, a few other residents had quietly experienced similar power plays from Carl in the past. He'd told someone they couldn't plant roses because they weren't community-friendly. Another homeowner claimed Carl tried to block their solar panel installation even though there were no rules against it. And now, with the fence drama bringing everything to the surface, people were fed up. The meeting room was packed that evening. I showed up a few minutes late on purpose, hoping to just quietly sit in the back. But the moment I walked in, half the room turned and gave me nods of quiet support. I nodded back, unsure how to feel about becoming the accidental hero of the neighborhood. Carl, sitting at the head of the table, looked more exhausted than smug for once. His hair was a little messy, his shirt untucked at the waist. Maybe it was finally hitting him that he couldn't bully his way out of this one. The first 30 minutes of the meeting went over the usual stuff, landscaping updates, budget reports, community garden improvements. But then came the final item, leadership review and vote. The board chair, who clearly had lost confidence in Carl herself, stood up and calmly opened the floor. She acknowledged the recent concerns from homeowners, the complaints, the unauthorized use of private land, and the misuse of board authority. She didn't make it personal. She didn't accuse. But she didn't have to. The facts were enough. Then she asked if anyone wanted to speak before the vote. To my surprise, it wasn't me who stood up. It was Mr. Kellerman again, the older gentleman who had spoken out in my defense weeks earlier. When I moved here, he began, we all agreed on one thing, respect. Respect for property, for neighbors, for the rules we all follow. Somewhere along the way, that respect got lost. Carl, you've done a lot for this community, and I won't pretend otherwise. But lately, it feels like you've started running the HOA like it's your kingdom instead of your responsibility. Another woman stood up next. We've had to push back on you more than once, Carl. It's not just about the fence. It's how you react when things don't go your way. It's how you treat people like they're obstacles. The room buzzed with quiet murmurs. I stayed seated, choosing to say nothing. I didn't need to speak. Everyone already knew the story. They'd seen it play out firsthand. When the vote came, it wasn't even close. Carl was removed by a wide margin, 17 in favor, 3 against, 5 abstentions. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He simply stood up, grabbed his folder, and walked out of the room without another word. A new interim president was appointed the following week. Her name was Denise, a retired teacher with a calm presence and a focus on transparency. The first email she sent to the neighborhood was short and clear: going forward, personal property will be respected. Board members are here to serve, not to dictate. Just reading those words felt like a breath of fresh air. Since Carl's removal, the entire tone of the neighborhood shifted. People started being more neighborly again, but in the right way. No more entitlement. No more forced togetherness at someone else's expense. Even small things changed. I noticed fewer complaints being filed. People started asking permission instead of assuming. Someone even left a note on my mailbox saying, "Thanks for standing your ground. You reminded all of us where the line is." One afternoon, I got a knock on the door. It was a young couple from 2 streets over. They introduced themselves and said they were thinking about buying a house nearby. They'd heard about the Lakefront situation, as they called it, and asked if I had any advice. I invited them in, gave them a glass of lemonade, and told them what I wished someone had told me when I moved in: buy the house you love. Enjoy it. But protect it. Because sometimes the real battle isn't getting the house, it's keeping what's yours when people try to take it. They thanked me and left with smiles, and I realized something I hadn't seen before. This wasn't just about a fence. It was about the bigger picture, about knowing your rights, standing firm, and not letting someone else rewrite your story. To this day, the fence still stands. Strong. Clean. Quiet. And behind it is a lake that belongs to me. Not just in legal terms, but in heart. I don't regret building that fence for a second. If anything, I wish I had done it sooner. Because that fence didn't divide the neighborhood. It revealed the truth. It showed who respected boundaries and who didn't. It exposed power for what it was. And it reminded everyone that sometimes the strongest stand you can take is simply drawing the line and not moving it, no matter how loudly someone else screams. So now, when I sit by my lake and hear nothing but birdsong and wind brushing across the water, I don't just feel peace, I feel pride. I earned this. I protected this. And no HOA president, no entitled family member, and no clipboard-wielding bully will ever take that from me again.